Good evening, I am Aparna Baling and I teach in the Department of Art History and Aesthetics in Baroda. That's a very short introduction to me, myself. So I'll be speaking on Ratnabali Kant's performances. So I didn't follow a very linear and chronological order, but as my thoughts progressed, I arranged them in that manner to get a connection and a basic outline to give a view into her practice. Am I audible? Yes. Thank you. So I've titled this paper as you can see, Of Bodies, Desires and Interrogating the Vitrines, a reading through the performances of Ratnabali Kant. So I'll begin with a poem written by Dennis Frohman. It's titled A Woman's Place. I heard a woman becomes herself the first time she speaks without permission. Then every word out of her mouth a riot. Say beautiful and point to the map of your body. Say brave and wear your skin like a gown or a suit. Say hero and cast yourself in the lead role. When a girl pronounces her own name, there is glory. When a woman tells her own story, she lives forever. The female body or female bodies had been her center of imagination. The body that had been reclaimed by a woman artist to write the stories of her encounters as a woman. She makes a room of her own, full of women speaking about them. These sculpted bodies breaks their vitrines, questions their representational histories. The female body becomes the subject and the object of art. A woman's performance art interrogates the function of woman, all that signifies a woman. The aim is to challenge the language and metaphors which promotes woman's oppression. Here, she is the speaking subject rather than an object who is silenced. She speaks from the position of interiority. She sits in her woman house where she reflects as an author, subject, director, and designer. She conveys her own perceptions, her own fantasies, and her own analysis. Her performances doesn't snatch herself away. She is not removed from herself, the experiential realities of her own gender. She is not hiding behind the aharya, that is the makeup. It's not about masking, but self-revelation. As an intellectual producer, a conscious political subject. G. Ford mentions, I quote, the very placement of the female body in the context of performance art positions a woman and her sexuality as a speaking subject. An action which cuts across numerous science systems, not just the discourse of language. The semiotic havoc created by such a strategy combines physical presence, real time, and real woman in dissonance with their representations, threatening the patriarchal structure with the revolutionary text of their actual bodies. Ratnabali Kant has studied sculpture from Kala Bhavan Vishwabharati Shantiniketan and did her master's from the Faculty of Fine Arts, the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Baroda. Her sculptural practices are deeply embedded in the search for the body consciousness, which is feminine. She later did a doctoral research on dynamic elements in ancient Greek sculpture at Athens University, Greece, between 1983 and 86. It made her aware of the relation between the theater and the relief sculpture in ancient Greek tradition, which illustrated the episodes of mythologies, which reminded her of the same relation between dance and sculptural tradition, which is also being mentioned in the Vishnu Dharmottar Puran. In Greece, she performed Chitrangada, a dance drama by Rabindranath Tagore. She chose to perform Chitrangada as it spoke of agency, the right to choose one's gender. Chitrangada, who was born as a woman and raised as a male child, and was a great warrior who challenged Arjun in war, but later falls in love with him and transforms into a beautiful woman and then again back to her own confident self. Most of Ratnabali's performances are fully empowered by feminist discourses. In her earlier days, she was exposed to theatre and dance through her father, Sudhiranjan Ghosh, a doctor. She was trained under Uday Shankar and later she learned Kathakali. Personalities like Madhur Sarkar, Habib Tanveer, and Safdar Hashmi instill in her the art of protest. Each of her performances were explicit protests against the brutality and injustices that a woman had to suffer. This also reminds of the early protest performances which talked about dowry deaths and sati in 1987. She critically looks at the idea of the maternal historically and through myths and layers it often with present narratives. Many of her works are often reenactments of her earlier works and aligned with other works. I have chosen few of them and attempted to create femages, that is the feminist term for collages out of it. I'd like to bring Rosalind Krauss in this context. She brings in the challenges, the usual notion of sculpture, which brings in references to monuments. So sculpture is usually traditionally was associated with monuments and glorification of rulers and political kings and all, political personas. So that the idea of sculpture is transcending. That is what Rosalind is discussing in her groundbreaking essay, Sculpture in the Expanded Field. So she mentions sculptures as normally figurative and vertical, their pedestals an important part of the structure since they mediate between actual sight and representational sign. Sculpture suffered from sightlessness or homelessness, an absolute loss of place. The sculptural practices are not defined in relation to a given medium. They appear as installations which also become part of the live performances which extended beyond the pedestals and continued through the artist's performing body. So I'll start with her. I Feel Life to be Green was performed in 1994 at Ranchi, then at Max Muller Bhavan and in Shantiniketan. This is a multi-art project with paintings, sculptures, scrolls, banners, projections, and costumes. She collaborated with the tribals and talked about the loss of their land and autonomy. This talk of power and the misconstrued idea of civilization and the hegemonic imposition of urban values and erasures of cultural memories of people. That was the focus of her performance. So this I Feel Life to be Green consists of many performances, many pieces actually. So I'm going to discuss few of them. Lunatic Exile, which was part of this I Feel Life to be Green, speaks of the extended ideas of madness which goes beyond the clinical and often had been looked upon as an irrational, the alibi through which the colonialists and the urban bourgeois preach the idea of development and progress, whereas actually erasing the identity and agency of the people. She questions what happens when a woman is raped in facing nightmare alone. She reinvokes the myth of Draupadi. Earlier in 1991, she also performed this piece at India International Center, New Delhi. She named it the Performing Sculpture. The fallen female nude represents Draupadi, and the panel represents her 5 husbands and Krishna. The tormented Draupadi that is embodied by Ratnabali struggles to protect herself from the aggression. Her body is engaged with the sculptural figures at the back with red clothes simulating the idea of umbilical cords, which again stands as the feminine connection. She expands, it talks about the female body, very metaphorically, She expands the field of sculpture from being still to that of a more performative one. It reminds of Mahashweta Devi's Draupadi and the further critical reading of it by Gayatri Chakraborty's Spivak. Spivak mentions Draupadi is the name of the central character. She is introduced to the reader between two uniforms and between two versions of her name, Draupadi and Dopti. It is either that as a tribal she cannot pronounce her own Sanskrit name, Draupadi, or the tribalized form, Dobdi. Is the proper name of the ancient Draupadi? She is on the list of wanted persons, yet her name is not on the list of appropriate names for tribal women. So she is accused of being a Naxalite. It is Draupadi who provides the only example of polyandry, not a common system of marriage in India. She is married to the 5 sons of the important Pandu. Within a patriarchal and patronymic context, she is exceptional, indeed singular, in the sense of odd, unpaired, uncoupled. Her husbands, since they are husbands rather than lovers, are legitimately pluralized. No acknowledgement of paternity can secure the name of the father for the child of such a mother. Mahashweta's story questions this singularity by placing Dobdi first in a comradely, activist, monogamous marriage, and then in a situation of multiple rape. In the epic, Draupadi's legitimized pluralization as a wife among husbands, in singularity as a possible mother or harlot, is used to demonstrate male glory. She provides the occasion for a violent transaction between men, the efficient cause of the crucial battle. Her eldest husband is about to lose her by default in a game of dice. She has staked all he owns, and Draupadi belongs within that all. Her strange civil status seems to offer grounds for her predicament as well. The scriptures prescribe one husband for a woman. Draupadi is dependent on many husbands. Therefore, she can be designated as a prostitute. There is nothing improper in bringing her, clothed or unclothed, into the assembly. The enemy chief begins to pull at Draupadi's sari. Draupadi silently prays to the incarnate Krishna. The idea of sustaining law. So Spivak and Mahashweta both are reading law as dharma and dharma as law. Materializes itself as clothing, and as the king pulls and pulls at a sari, there seems to be more and more of it. Draupadi is infinitely clothed and cannot be publicly stripped. It is one of Krishna's miracles. Mahashweta's story rewrites this episode. The men easily succeed in stripping Dobdi in the narrative. It is a culmination of a political punishment by the representatives of the law. So in the story, actual story of Dobdi Mechen, and not the mythical Draupadi, she is being raped. And she doesn't need any kind of protection. She doesn't ask for any protection, but she confronts the police. She remains publicly naked at her own insistence, rather than save her modesty through the implicit intervention of a benign and divine. In this case, it would have been godlike. Comrade, story insists that this is the place where male leadership stops. Draupadi is at once a palimpsest and a contradiction. Further, Hidden Act talks about a tribal woman getting pregnant, tribal mad woman getting pregnant. She is mad, as if her madness takes away her gender identity, her body is denied any agency, and is available for male desire, as she is supposed to be without any consciousness. The other image which comes to my mind is that of the discourse of madness and woman portrayed in English literature, specially brought forth by Sandra M. Gilbert and Susan Gobar in their book, The Mad Woman in the Attic. So this was based on Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre and the character, of Mad Woman Bertha Mason. The Mad Woman in the Attic as the monster woman, as the other of the submissive and the angelic, the irrational or the unregulated one, the alter ego of the subservient one, and she is also doubly marginalized as the Jamaican Creole. So doubly marginalized because she is mad and she is a tribal, like Bertha Mason. She is mad and she is a Creole. Here too, the frenzied woman had a double text of the taken for granted unconsciousness of a tribal woman, and that of a mad woman who had lost the consciousness of her being and can be violated. She doesn't remember herself and the perpetrator. Death of Desire was performed at Kamani Auditorium in 1996. She included ritualistic elements and ready-mades like the gharas or earthen pots, thread, liquid colors and red powder. She refers to the rituals such as dand or prostration performed by the devotees in different places and as part of different rituals to fulfill their desires. Ratnabali painted the gharas and then broke them into pieces. This performance evokes the death rituals and that of desires. The earthen pots were arranged in a pyramidal structure on which she painted a phallus in black with flat brush strokes of black paint. In the center hovered the black male face. The phallus was destroyed by applying vertical strips of the primary colors, red, blue, yellow, and the letter B was written to bring out the Bobbit incident that took place in 1993, when a woman, Lorena Gala, castrated her husband as she could not anymore tolerate the repeated marital rape. Many rituals are mostly designed to suffocate the woman in oppressive conditions, and their desires are designed by patriarchy. By incorporating such processes of femininity, what the artist does is to question the very purposiveness of these rituals. The intentions, instead of being woman-centric, are phallocentric. She attempts to destroy phallogocentrism, the privileging of the phallus or the masculine, and the domination of this idea in the societal relations and creation of meanings. The other thing which she again repeats as a motive is that of the artist as the maternal body and the fear of losing the capability to produce sculptural work. The magic of making in the process of performing the ideas rather than creating them in three-dimensional forms. The detritus of the performance was being left there for a few days. End of the scroll, it is again a reiteration of her earlier works, inclusion of death of desire and the birth of civilizations. She lied on two beds, talking about divisions of land and then the idea of death, the turning of the body into matter and the eventual oneness with earth. She again refers to the death ritual where water is being poured from one to the other and older to the newer vessel, talking about death, birth and regeneration. Then there is also this piece, my body is an extension of earth. It again goes back to the idea of life and death and regeneration, the death of an artist and the urge to be born again, to create again. The idea of earth as the mother and the creator and the artist as the mother is being focused on. She attempts to empathize with earth, aligns her body with earth and connects with the idea of suffering, pain and destruction. Virginia Woolf had mentioned there is a poverty of the language of pain. She states, but for pain, I quote Virginia Woolf, but for pain words are lacking. There should be cries, cracks, fissures, whiteness passing over chins covers, interference with the sense of time, of space, the sense also of extreme fixity in passing objects, and sounds very remote and then very close, flesh being gashed and blood spurting, a joint suddenly twisted beneath all of which appears something very important yet remote, to just be held in solitude. The artist stretches the privacy of pain to an ecological one. She tries to connect the private and the public. Pain Within was a performance for the Jamia Millia students. In which she again talks about the identification with earth in relation to pain. That pain flows into the creative energy. She talks about violence and exploitation and betrayal, where mostly the woman suffers the most. This is evident again in her piece, Global Agony, which was performed as part of I Feel Life to be Green in 1995. Red Under the Golden Halo was in Kolkata in January 2001 in Birla Academy of Art and Culture. This spoke of violence in various forms, like communal violence. There is a wide stretched canvas mounted high up, about 20 meters up. The artist throws bucket of red paints on the canvas, climbing up and down the ladder several times. The canvas turned bloody. Then the artist rolled on another piece of 20 meters long canvas, which had been spread at the foot. She goes on saying, I quote her, "The society in which we are living in is suicidal," pointing to the idea of self-destruction. Constantly uttering the same sentence, she kept on striding back and forth, dripping paint from the bucket all the way, and then she kept rolling down, back and forth, as if being part of the violence, as if the blood is part of her body. Then she nails a golden circle onto the canvas and throws black paint on it. It speaks of how violence gets muffled and suppressed, be it communal and domestic. This strongly reminds of the physicality of the performer, the female performer, and the idea of bleeding and the female body apart from the death and destruction. The last performance took place in 2005 in the open lawn of Vittalbhai Patel House in New Delhi. This work was conceived and dedicated to the memory of Sardar Hashmi, a well-known theatre person who was stoned to death while he was performing. It speaks of violence, she speaks of bloodshed. It speaks of violence, she speaks of bloodshed, and also the autonomy of an artist, which keeps him or her going, protesting against the violence, both physical and epistemic, which are imposed on them. Again, she works with the motif of death, this time of an artist, and also creating parallels with that of other forms of violence. A large canvas was created at a height and reached by the artist for the sequence of a performance by climbing a tall ladder. She writes on the canvas 1st January 1989 to remember the day when Sardar Hashmi was murdered. The artist kept various liquids in pots and buckets ready for the use. On the ground, the artist threw these colors one by one from mugs, carried and thrown on the canvas. After all the colors were being splashed on the canvas, black was being thrown as if to recall the death and the violent attack on Sardar Hashmi 16 years ago. She then recited from Pablo Neruda's poem, "And one morning everything burst into flames." Then she flung red powder color on the black, creating the feeling of a burned canvas. Then a long scroll was rolled on the ground, and thick red liquid colors symbolizing blood was dropped on the scroll, right from the foot of the canvas all the way to the line of the spectators. And all the while, the artist was passionately reciting, "Come see the blood along the streets." After laying down the bucket of red paint, the artist stood up and said, "I come to speak for your dead mouths." And then the artist started rolling along it as if in agony, chanting the lines, "Give me the struggle, the iron, the volcanoes. Let bodies cling like magnets to my body. Speak through my speech and through my blood." The artist then stood up at the foot of the canvas and pasted 4 pieces of painted rainbow on the paintings so as to depict the hope that creative freedom would return to the world from all 4 directions. The artist then pasted 100 pairs of rainbow paintings in the shape of footprints along the length of scrolls, symbolizing the creative genius of 100 daring artists, past and present. Her Birth of a Civilization at Sridharani Gallery in New Delhi in 1996 is a palimpsest of narratives speaking of the civilization which is in a process to be discarded, which is moving towards the age of digitalization. Ratnabali performs as the maternal body which creates produces art and civilization. She uses the maternal metaphor. She invokes the birthing process as the creative process, as had been done by many women writers. She voices out the anxiety of art losing its aura in the context of technological progress. She performs live and she also becomes the body or sculpture which she carries around, voicing the death of traditional art and the fear of aging. She carries the egg, symbolizing the nascent, impending idea of a digital civilization. Sylvia Plath writes, so it reminds me of Sylvia Plath. Open mouth, the baby god, immense, bald, though baby-headed, cried out for the mother's dove. The dry volcanoes cracked and spilt. Sand abraded the milkless lip. Cried then for the father's blood. It reminds of the ambivalent role of the mother, where sometimes the mother is not in control of a situation. She suggests the sense of autonomy and identity while birthing. In The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir declares that the birth of children often goes hand in hand with the death of the parents. Way of a Warrior was performed in 1997 in Seema Art Gallery, Kolkata. It was again a series of performances consisting of the following sections: Death of the Book, Home Space and My Body is an Extension of Earth. Death of a Book again talks about an orchestrated death of an ideology. It speaks about the Naxalite emergency in the 1970s in Kolkata, where young intellectuals were programmed to death. Women suffered, mothers mourned or kept waiting for their sons, like that of the mother of 1984, which is Hajar Churasi Ma or Hajar Churasi Ka Ma, written by Ma Shweta Devi. It got a filmic form, Govind Nilhani's Hajar Churasi Ki Ma. It is the women who are always implicated in violence. She chanted, something broke, no one saw, something shattered, nobody heard, something vanished, nobody cared. That space is nowhere is another piece. In this piece, the floor becomes the world where the artist created motifs on floor to represent the sun, the earth, and the rain. Again, invoking the bratas or rituals conducted for domestic desires. It speaks of a woman's search for her place. How safe is that space? Does she belong to that space? Does she have a room of her own? Way of a Warrior was performed in India Habitat Center in 1999. It also consists of earlier performances where she talks about the idea of a domestic space being problematic and unstable. It talks about Nirmala from Chandigarh, a woman who rented her womb to save her husband, thus questioning the very fundamental idea of motherhood as natural, and also on the idea of the ever-nourishing mother and the image of the woman as a wife who is ever ready to sacrifice, even to an extent of the self-effacing act of carrying a child for another woman whom she has to give up. Motherhood is not even a natural process here, but is commodified, has an exchange value. She began by reading a newspaper report and tying to her chest a male torso of paper mache as a shield, and strapped above it a womb-shaped form with a blue fetus painted on it. She undraped the sari, rejecting the vaunted notions of femininity. So this was, of course, symbolic, and she had other draperies, other clothes on her. But as a symbolism, of decrying or rejecting the vaunted femininity. She further extends it to the mythological character of Kunti in Womb of Fire, where she speaks again of an exploited womb. Kunti's desire for motherhood, wasn't it manipulated towards an unwed pregnancy where her choice to keep the child was denied to her? Kunti stands for all women who were exploited in the name of religion, like the Devadasis, who were raped again and again by the priests and had children who were denied any proper identity. Mythology had often in Indian literature been used to garb sexual violence in the name of the divine. Ratnabali sees the continuity in the present context of rape and the way it's being reported and presented in the public sphere. There is a protected ignorance, to borrow this very interesting term from Professor Yashoda Alone's research. There is a protected ignorance about the fact of women getting exploited in relation to their body in art throughout the history of representation in various art forms. Ratnabali is interrogating the glorified idea of motherhood and mythicality as had been represented in Indian art. The beautiful images of mother and child, all plain without any bruises, hurt or pain, like the paintings of Jamini Roy or Nandalal Bose and Avanindranath Tagore. Her performances are charged with shrill cries which are constantly polemical or representational strategies too. She dares to destroy the image of a pregnant mother. So this is the sculpture from form of the same work. Just a second. Okay, use the performances there. We can go back to that. Okay. Yes. Her performances are charged with shrill cries, which are constantly shrill cries which are constantly polemical of representational strategies too. She dares to destroy the image of a pregnant mother, asserting on the idea of how motherhood is an act of choice and cannot be aestheticized always, to emphasize on the patriarchal ideas. They question the very ideas of nature and nurturer. The embodiment of women in her performances are not passive receivers of act, like the various images of sleeping beauties in the Ravi Verma paintings, and neither they are the tableaus of women. The monolithic idea of woman as submissive and internalizing pain is dismantled repeatedly in her recreation of woman. She herself is not the passive receiver of art historical inheritance of the desirable woman. She denies the male ventriloquism and creates feminine metaphors, culling out critically from the mythological to that of the present-day events. Her women are kicking and alive, decrying the pictorial frames assigned to them by the male artists, charged with a meaning of their own and are relevant to their lived experiences. The birth of Karna, a fiberglass sculpture made in relation to this piece, shows a female nude in the birthing posture, a seemingly plain woman of immense strength, producing a mythical character, an unwanted child. The artist creates the female palimpsest, rewriting the body in order to efface its supposedly scripted function. She breaks the ground of the construed femininity and denies the still tableau of woman on canvas. The spectacles are created not to cater to any titillatory aesthetics, but to rupture the dominant system of representation, situating them within a feminist critique, interrogating the patriarchal culture. Like, as Virginia Woolf mentions, women writers must kill the aesthetic ideal through which they themselves have been killed into art. Thank you.